Hi everybody, Steven here. So you heard of this thing called a vSAN stretch cluster? Not sure what it is? Stick around, that's what we're going to talk about. See you in a bit. Hi everybody, thanks for sticking around. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover what a vSAN stretch cluster is. This is kind of a follow-on to our two-node cluster. For those of you that watch that, very similar in nature, right? So we'll talk about what it is. I got a little bit of a lecture component, but we'll also demo it. We'll build a stretch cluster right from scratch. Now, before we start, I like to throw this out at this point. If this is stuff you're kind of interested in, please support the channel by subscribing to it. It's very simple. Hit that subscribe button. It's free, right? Another way to support the channel is with super thanks. Again, totally up to you, and I would appreciate it. And last but not least, for those of you that have subscribed or submitted super thanks, 2 or 3 thumbs up to you. So why don't we jump into it? Let's get started. Let's get my iPad going here. All right, let's talk about a vSAN stretch cluster. So what it is, again, if you have not seen, if you don't know what vSAN is, you need to watch my vSAN 101. I'll leave a link for that up here or here, whatever. Okay. So what it is we're taking a vSAN cluster, and for lack of a better term, we're going to stretch it across 2 locations. So I may have some hosts in location 1, another set of hosts in location 2, and then I'm going to create the vSAN data store across those locations, which is really cool when you think about it. So I can have this shared data store across 2 different locations. Really cool stuff. And this can help me, well, let's think about this. If a complete site fails, I have redundancy at a site level now. Now, there are some requirements here. So if we look at this picture, again, for those of you that watch the 2-node cluster, very similar stuff here. Here's my vSAN data store down at the bottom that's stretched across the locations. So you'll see I have site 1 and site 2. These are data sites. My sites sit at the data. My data sits at the site, sorry. Then we also have, let me change my colors. So see, I have 3 servers at this site and 3 servers at this site. Technically speaking, a minimum would be 1 server for each site. You can have a maximum of 20 hosts per site. So a total of 40 hosts in this stretch cluster, okay? There are some requirements. Now the vSAN network goes across your sites here, all right? There is requirements of latency. You have to have nothing more than 5 milliseconds round trip latency. So these sites can't be like, one can't be in New York and another one in Los Angeles type of thing, right? They have to be relatively close to each other. So maybe these are 2 buildings on a campus, okay? Or something like that. So this latency, this 5 milliseconds latency is very critical, okay? You already talked about the maximum of hosts and stuff. So the only downside about this latency requirement is if there's a disaster coming in, let's say, oh, there's an ice storm coming in, or, oh, there's a hurricane coming in. If that hurricane's going to hit just site 1, again, you could probably move all your machines, your VMs over to site 2 and avoid that disaster. But if the hurricane's going to affect both locations because it's a campus and the buildings are just whatever a mile apart or something like that, then obviously that's not going to really help you out. So that's kind of one of the limiting factors here. I'll also do a thing on site recovery management, but that's something completely different. So this is kind of cool. We got our vSAN data store across locations here. Now, one of the things we need is this thing called a witness. Okay, the witness basically, well, it acts as a quorum. It says, oh, hey, this site is okay and that site's okay. So, for example, if the witness wasn't there and we got a split brain condition occurring here, how do we know which site's the good site and which one's not? Okay, so so that's what this witness is for. No data resides on the witness, just a witness component. Okay, again, make sure you watch my vSAN 101. So only a witness component runs on a witness. Now, this witness can be a physical ESXi server. So you can actually have a physical ESXi server acting as your witness. Great, you can do that. Problem is, though, this has to be licensed. You have to license it for that, okay? Or better yet, I talked about this in my 2-node, there is a witness appliance. There is a witness appliance. So it's a VM that you can download from the VMware site, and I showed that in my 2-node cluster. You'll see us deploy the appliance here. Now, there is 2 different appliances as of this recording. There is one if you're going to use the original storage architecture. So this is going to be original storage architecture. There's an appliance specifically for that. If you're going to be using the newer express storage architecture, there's an appliance specifically for that, okay? And I've showed that in my 2-node cluster. So make sure you got the right appliance. Now, this witness, notice here the latency between the witness. It can be up to 200 milliseconds away. So that's pretty far away, okay? I don't know how far, but anyway, you guys can do the calculations, right? So if you've got less than 10 hosts at each cluster, 200 milliseconds is okay. As soon as you have greater than 10 hosts, so let's say we're going to hit our 20 host maximum, or you got 11 hosts at each site, then we want that latency to be as low as 100 milliseconds. So this 5 millisecond rule only applies to the vSAN network here, okay? So that's where all our data is being replicated across that vSAN network. vSAN network. Okay? All right. The other thing, too, with vSAN, you're transferring a lot of data. So you want to use something like jumbo frames. Jumbo frames. So you want your MTU, maximum transmission unit size, to be like, let's say, 9,000, right? Anything larger than 1,500 is jumbo frame. So you want something. So your vSAN network, you want to have that 9,000 MTU here. This way we can move larger frames across the network, more data across the network faster, right? Now the MTU here does not have to support jumbo frames. You can still have a 1,500. So I could have jumbo frames down here in the vSAN network and just regular frames up here, which is cool, which is kind of nice. Okay. So the whole advantage here is, again, we're going to have our VM, and we're going to basically be putting components. Let's get maybe this color. We'll be putting components. Maybe actually, let me do this again. Let me try this one more time, folks. Right. So I'm going to have a VM here running on this site, let's say, and maybe I'm going to do a failure to tolerate equals 1, and I'm going to be doing mirroring. So generally, if you're doing, with the advantage of stretch clusters, you can do site mirroring. Site mirroring. I'm going to demo both of these, right? So with site mirroring, I can have a component sitting here, another component on this host in site 1, and maybe a witness component here, okay? Just like regular failure to tolerate equals 1. Then I'm going to take this and mirror this over here. So maybe I'll put a component here, and a witness here, let's say, right? So I'm taking this stuff and replicating it over here. So the complete VM and its witness gets replicated. That's the advantage of site mirroring. If this was express storage architecture and you're doing RAID 5, let me change my colors. So I'm doing express storage architecture. I can do a component here, let's say, and a component here. I'm doing RAID 5 for my VM. Then I'm doing site mirroring, RAID 1. So I'm going to take this and mirror it over here. Let's say there, component. So component and parity type of thing. I guess you can look at it like that. So this would be kind of like a RAID 1.5 or RAID 15 type of thing. So that's the advantage of this stretch clusters. You can get higher level availability at a lower cost type of thing. So that's really neat. So again, if a complete site fails, you have redundancy. So we'll talk about failures and stuff. Now, I got this little thing down here. I'll explain that right now. Now, one of the things here is this witness. I'm going to talk about the appliance. It also applies if you want to use the physical ESXi server. I'm not sure why you would do that. By this way, this witness site, so these are 3 different sites, okay? This witness site could be in the cloud somewhere. So maybe you got 2 buildings, but I need a 3rd one. Maybe you can host that somewhere, right? You know, some partner or something like that. So this would run on top of an ESXi server, let's say, right? So you're going to have that hosted somewhere else. Now, the vSAN network down here, notice it says layer 2 or layer 3. So technically, they could be going through a router. Let me clean up my picture. So I could have one layer 2 network here, another layer 2 network going through a router, my layer 3. So no problems. I could do something like that. Okay. So in other words, what that means for those of you that are not that familiar with networks is the vSAN network here could be on one subnet. The vSAN network over here could be on a different subnet, as long as you got routing between them so they can talk. Routing between the vSAN network, Probably not the greatest idea because the router is going to add latency, but if you got no choice, you got no choice, okay? So you want to keep, and that falls within that 5 milliseconds too, folks. So if you add in a router, you got to see what the latency is between, okay? So you got to keep that in the back of your mind. Now, same thing here with the witness. Notice it says layer 2 or layer 3. Again, this witness could be on the same subnet as your vSAN network here. All right. In my demo, that's exactly what I'm going to do. But probably in the real world, it's not going to be the case. This vSAN, the vSAN network over here, the vSAN witness network, could be on a different layer 2 network. And you're going to have routing from this network and that network over to here. Now, if you don't, let's say you don't have routing in your vSAN network, and I kind of mentioned this in the 2-node cluster. If you don't have routing in your vSAN network, but you have routing for, let's say, your vMotion or your management network, let's say, you could go and tell vSAN, hey, vSAN, don't talk to the witness using the vSAN network. Use some other VM kernel port, and that's what I'm showing up here. And I kind of mentioned this in the 2-node. You would go on to each host, not the witness. You would go onto each host and run this command, NSX-T live vSAN network IP add interface VM kernel 0. In this example, they're using the management. It could be VM kernel 1 for whatever. And then capital T, what type of traffic, and you're saying witness. So you would run this on each host on your vSAN cluster saying, hey, don't use the vSAN network to talk to the witness. Use, in this example, since it's VM kernel 0, use the management network because the management network has routing set up. Maybe your vSAN network doesn't, okay? That's the only time you're going to need this. And when you do this, by the way, this does not create a VM kernel port for you. It just adds that service to an existing VM kernel. So right here, when you look at VM kernel 0, sorry, I scratched that out. When you look at VM kernel 0, you actually see it's my management network. It's on a distributed switch. Here's its IP address. The default stack is IP or whatever. But notice here, it says the services, it's management +1. And you click on that +1, and it comes up and shows you enable services. Notice vSAN witness is one of them. So the only time you're going to need this, just to be clear, again, is if your vSAN network for your hosts, let's minimize this. So these guys down here does not have routing set up to get to the vSAN network on this witness. Okay, that would be a situation. You can also set up static routes. No, sorry, you got no routes. Never mind. Okay, so so that's one option as well. I think that's it. All right, let's talk about. So this is basically what it looks like. One of the things I want to mention here is there's a thing called a preferred site and a secondary site. The preferred site is, hey, when all else fails, I prefer you to run on this site over here. So you would have to specify which one. And you could change your mind. You say, oh, I want this site to be the preferred site, and next week I want that one to be the preferred site. You could do that. It's very simple to change. So you'll see I've got VMs running over here, and I've got VMs running over here. No problems. And again, we have our witness communication, and again, we have our vSAN network, which I'm not really illustrating here, but that's kind of showing me right there. So what happens if there's a failure? So if this link between the two sites break, you know, let's say a construction worker goes and cuts your cable, right? These VMs over here, since we still have access to the witness, the witness sees that, oh, there's a problem over here, right? We're going to take these and run these over on the preferred site. Sorry, let's try that again. We're going to take these and run these over to preferred site. So it's going to shut them down or power them off, depending on what your HA settings is, the isolation response. And then it's going to reboot those machines over here and start running on the preferred site. So if this link goes down, everything is going to run on the preferred site. How about, and I'll probably do a separate video showing you different failures and stuff. How about if this link fails? Right? Well, if this link here fails from the preferred site to the witness, again, the opposite will occur. We'll shut down those VMs or turn them off, and then we'll fail them over to our secondary site. Same thing would occur if the whole site died, okay, folks? All right? Now, how about this? Suppose if you're having a real bad day and both sites lose access to the witness, but this link here is still up, okay? Nothing will happen. Failover will not occur. So in that situation, you would have to address what is the problem, because we can't really tell what's going on here, right? There's also other possible failures as well, where we can actually, I'll probably save that for another video, but where we can actually tolerate multiple failures and still recover from that. But I'll save that for another video. This is just kind of setting things up. So that's kind of the idea behind the stretch cluster. So why don't we get started with the demo then, okay? All right, everybody, let's create our stretch cluster. So the first thing I'm going to do is deploy the appliance, the Witness appliance. You'll notice here I have 7 hosts. My first 6, host 1 through to 6, will be in my vSAN stretch cluster, which I'll show you afterwards. Host 7 is going to house or host my Witness appliance. Again, imagine host 7's in a different cluster somewhere, whatever, okay? It could even be hosted on the cloud or whatever the case may be. But I'm just using host 7 here. So I'm going to right-click. I'm going to say new OVF appliance or template, say virtual machine, local file over here. And then I'm basically going to, there's my vSAN Witness appliance. I'll say OK. And this is basically, I'm creating an original storage architecture stretch cluster. Not that it really kind of matters, but anyways, I'll go next. I'm going to give the VM a name. I'll call it whatever, vSAN Witness. OSA, original storage architecture, whatever. I'll go next. And I'm going to pick host 7. I'm going to go next. And then we always sit back and wait for the little spinny thing to finish, right? So let's give it a few seconds here. And remember, this host 7 could be in a separate management cluster. Maybe I got multiple clusters in my data center or whatever, right? So again, a little summary screen. I'll go next. Again, read through the license agreement. I read it. I'll accept it. I'll go next. And then again, this depends on the size of the appliance will depend on the number of VMs you can have. I'm going to stick with medium, but again, you pick the one that's appropriate for your environment, okay? I'm going to go next. Now it's asking me, remember this is a VM, it's asking me where do I want to store this. I'm going to put it on host 7's local data store. So host 7 doesn't have like shared storage, it just has a local disk. That's okay, I don't care, right? I'm going to do, I'll leave thick provisioning, why not? And I'll go next. And at that point, notice it's asking me for 2 networks, the management network and a secondary network, okay? So this appliance got 2 NICs. It's asking me what port groups do I want to connect it on. Host 7 only has the VM network. Let's just confirm that. It only has the VM network port group. I could have created different port groups. Probably would have been a good idea, but it's not really required. I would probably create a 1 port group for management and then another one for the vSAN network, right? And that would be my secondary. And I kind of demoed that if you watched my 2-node cluster. I actually did that. I got lazy this time around just to show you that I don't really have to do it. But in the real world, I probably have it separated, but you don't necessarily have to. So I'll leave those over there. I'll go next. Now it's asking me to fill in all the other stuff. So passwords and all that wonderful things. Let me go through and fill in my passwords. Now it's asking me, what network do I want for vSAN traffic? Notice it defaults to the secondary one, right? So it could be the first one or second. I'm going to pick the secondary. Now it's asking me, what's the address for this management of this appliance? So it'll be 172.20.10.59, 55. That's in my lab environment. And then what's my gateway? 172.20.10.10. And again, yours is going to be different. What's my domain? DNS domain. This is vclass.local is my domain. Yours is going to be different. What's the host name for the witness? I'll call it site a-witness.vclass.local. Again, I have DNS set up for that. One of my DNS servers, 172.20.10.10. That's mine. Again, yours is going to vary, and you can separate these with commas. And the NTP server, again, mine is this here. The second network adapter inside this VM, what's it going to be set to? Again, this is the IP. This is the vSAN network, okay? So mine is 172.20.30.59. Now, this odds are, if this is a different location, odds are it's not going to be the same layer 2 network as your vSAN network. So it'd probably be on a different subnet. I'm not going through routers or anything like that. So in my environment that's on the same layer 2, your environment's probably going to be different, okay? So, and I talked about that in the lecture. There's a subnet mask and the gateway. Again, if this is at a different location, it's probably going to have a gateway to get out, okay? My lab environment, I don't care, all right? So that looks okay. I'm going to go next. Gives me a summary. I hit finish, and then that's it. It's deploying the appliance. Okay? It's just deploying the VM. This will probably take a few minutes, so I'll probably just pause the recording until it's done, and we'll take a look at it. Okay? I'll see you back in a second. All right, we are back. It has finished deploying. So let's look at it. There's the appliance. I'm going to turn it on. Now, if you've watched my 2-node cluster, there's going to be no surprise here. So I just powered it on. Okay, let's go to summary here. And you see it's actually booting up. Let's go to launch web console. And if you watch my 2-node, this is not going to be a surprise for you. But if you haven't, what this is, it's booting up an ESXi server. So this appliance, this appliance for the witness is just a virtualized ESXi host. That's all it is. So it's pretty cool. So you got the choice of using this appliance or a physical box for your witness. The physical box, you got to license it. The appliance, you don't. Again, you'll see that. All right. So to me, it just makes sense. Why not use the appliance? Okay. So we'll just wait for it to come up, and then yeah, you know what? That's it. We'll just leave it alone. Actually, no. I got to do one more thing here. So I got to wait for it to come up. So let's make sure it comes up. We'll give it a few seconds. I could actually start a few things right now, but you know what? Let's just wait for everything to boot up. All right. So there, you see it's booted up. All it is an ESXi server. So what I need now to do, and this is the part where you got to kind of try to wrap your mind around it. I need to add it into my vCenter inventory so it sees it and it can be used as an appliance. So I'm going to right click on my data center. I'm going to say add host. So I'm added in an ESXi host, which is my witness appliance. And its fully qualified domain name is site-a-witness.vclass.local. I'll go next. I'll type in root and the password for that. Next. I don't care. We'll say yes. I'll go next. I don't care about managing it with the image. I'll go next. It's asking me what license. So this is the interesting part here. Again, you'll see here's my, I'm going to have to grade this out, but you'll see here there is the vSAN witness license that it comes with. So I'll go next, and then I'm going to disable lockdown mode. I don't care about all that stuff. And I'm finished. So there's the VM right there I've highlighted. And remember, it's an ESXi host. And then here is the witness that's been added into my inventory. And there's a reason why we have to do that, because when I go to select my witness, I have to see it as an object in my inventory. You know what? I'm going to create a folder here to make things a little bit easier for me to see. Let's right click on this, say new folder in hosting clusters. I'm going to call this witness. I'll call it vSAN witnesses. vSAN-witnesses, whatever. I'll say okay. I'm going to drag and drop that host 7 into there. And there's this witness. I'm going to put it in there. This way it's a little bit easier for me to see. I didn't have to do that. Let's create our cluster. So I'm going to go to my data center, new cluster, and I'm going to call this cluster-01-original storage architecture. I'm going to enable vSAN. I'm going to remove the express storage architecture. It doesn't really matter if I picked it or not, but my appliance is for the original storage architecture. Again, I don't care about managing lifecycle manager. I'll do separate videos on that. And I'm going to go next. Now, sorry. Notice I did not enable DRS or HA. I could have, but this is a vSAN demo. Okay? I'm just going to click next. I'm going to go finished. And I wait. And give it a few seconds here. And it's created a cluster, just like before. No problems. Let's add hosts. Let's go to add. I'm going to say existing host. And I'm going to pick host 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I'm adding 6 to my vSAN cluster. This is my stretch cluster. I'll go next. And then I go review, and I hit finish. And I just kind of wait. Let's expand this a bit. So it's doing a few things. It's updating the vSAN configuration. We'll give it a few minutes to do that. Okay? It's coming. I always wait for all that. Okay, so it's all done now. Let's get rid of that. I want to see it. All right. You'll notice I got a couple of warnings here about SCSI controller is not VMware certified. Yeah, because it's a nested environment, and something about the hardware compatibility list database is not up to date. In the real world, I'd worry about these. I'd wait for you to fix them and stuff like that. Do reevaluate. In my lab environment, I don't care. Great. So we got that. Let's configure the cluster. Before I do that, I got to go in and actually I could do this. Yeah, I'll do this on the fly. Let's go configure. Uh, no, I don't have time to do feedback on vSAN. Sorry about that. So I'm going to create, so right now I got a distributed switch for all those hosts. And that distributed switch is for management and vMotion, okay? For my vSAN in my lab environment, I got 4 NICs per host. So my first 2 NICs is on the first distributed switch for management and vMotion, whatever. And then my next 2 NICs in my host will be for a distributed switch just for vSAN, okay? That's how I'm set up. Your environment may be different. So I'm going to go through here and create a new distributed switch. I'll call it virtual distributed switch dash vSAN. You've seen me obviously doing this before. I'll pick this for my distributed switch for vSAN. I'm going to create a port group called vSAN on that distributed switch. So now it's asking me what network cards do I want to use. I'm going to say use physical cards, VMNIC2 and VMNIC3 for this distributed switch. That's really what I'm doing. So my first 2 NICs are for management and vMotion. My next 2 NICs here will be for vSAN traffic only. I'm going to go next. Now, do I want to use a VLAN for my vSAN network? You probably will in your environment. My environment, I don't need it. Again, do you want to use IP4, IP6, or both for your vSAN VM kernel traffic? I'm just going to use IP4. And again, you can assign it with DHCP or static. I'm just going to pick static addresses. And this is actually kind of weird. It's it's labeled. It's got it all kind of mixed up in a row here. So anyways, let me just go in and put in it's asking me for the IP address for the VM kernel ports for vSAN. So I'll do 172.20.30. This is host 656. Subnet mask 255.255.255.0. Now, remember, half of these hosts will be on one site, half will be on another. If I'm stretching my vSAN networks on a layer 2 across, they're all going to have the same gateway, or they may not have a gateway, okay? But if, let's say, the hosts in one site, the vSAN network is on the .30 network, 172.20.30, and the hosts on the other site are on the 172.20.40 network, I'd have to specify gateways so they could talk to each other. So this is where I would type in the appropriate gateway. In my lab environment, I don't care. They're all on the same flat layer 2 network. So this is something you got to watch for. I'm going to say autofill, and away we go. Now, there's some problems here with this. This should be 54. This should be 52. This should be 55. I don't know why it's not listed in order, but it doesn't really matter. This will be 51, and this will be 53. But that's okay. Better than typing everything out. So 51, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Great. I'm going to go next. Now at this point, it's asking me for the vSAN options. What am I doing? A single site? No, we've done that before. Do I want to do stretch cluster? Notice it's not giving me a choice for 2 node because I got more than 6 hosts, more than 2 nodes in my cluster. So I'm going to say stretch cluster. Now, before I select that, look over here on the left side here. Notice number 4 is claim disks. I'm going to pick stretch cluster. And then now it says configure fault domains, select witness host. So there's a few extra screens that get popped up. I'm not going to bother. I'm going to go with the defaults here. If you're not sure what this stuff is, watch my vSAN demo or what's vSAN. I'm going to click on next. I'm going to leave all these other options next. You know what? I'll explain these. Again, stretch. Do you want to do encryption? Do you want to do encryption at rest and encryption in transit? So the stuff's encrypted across the vSAN network. Do I want to do space efficient technology, compression, and all that? I'll talk about fault domains briefly. I have a video on that. Remote direct memory access support. If my physical cards support that, this would be enabled, and I would enable that, okay? I can enable it. And auto policy management, if I click on this, based on the type of cluster and number of hosts, vSAN creates and assigns the data store policies best capacity utilization. So this is kind of saying let vSAN make the decision on what policies a VM should have based on saving space. Anyways, I talked about all those in some other videos. But for now, we're just creating a stretch cluster. I'll go next. Now it's asking me to claim my disk. Notice all these are typed as hard drive. I'm just going to mark them all as solid state. Now, in the real world, don't change this unless you know, oh, hang on a second. It's seeing my solid state drives as a physical disk, HDD, and not a solid state or as flashed. Then you want to ask why. And I would ask why before continuing. So I've got basically 50 gig disks in the host. I'll use that as capacity, sorry, as cache. And then I'll use the hundreds as capacity tiers. All right. So basically how I got this figure configured, each host has a 50 gig disk. So my six hosts, each has a 50 gig solid state for cache. Each host also has two 100 gig disks for capacity. That's how I got my environment. That's good enough. I'll go next. Now it's asking me fault domains. Remember, this is going to be basically on two different sites. You got a preferred site and a secondary. I talked about that. I'm going to basically call this site Toronto, right? So you want to call it something that makes sense. And my secondary site, maybe it'll be my Peterborough office. They're very close to each other, okay? And I'm going to pick host, my Peterborough would be host 4, 5, and 6. So hosts 1, 2, and 3 are at Toronto. Peterborough 4, 5, and 6 are over there. So I'm creating a stretch cluster. I click next. Now it's asking me for the witness host. I'm going to expand this, and then there's my folder for my witnesses. Remember, I had to add in that appliance. So I created the VM from the appliance. Then I had to add in that virtualized ESXi. That's why I had to do that. And it's right here, site A witness. And it checks it, and it's okay. Great. I'll click on next. By the way, I could have selected my ESXi, host ESXi 7 as my witness, but I'd need a license for that. So the witness appliance, I don't. I'll go next. Now it's asking me to claim disk for the witness. Again, this created this automatically for me. So the 10 gig will be my cache, and then the 350 gig will be capacity for the witness. Remember, the witness does not hold any data. It just holds witness components. I'll click next. Gives me a good old summary. You can read through it. I hit finish. And at that point, it's going out and it's going to format the disks and all that wonderful stuff. This will take a couple of minutes, so we'll come back when it's done. See you all in a bit. By the way, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button, folks. And if you found this entertaining, hit that like button. It helps out with the YouTube algorithms. Okay? We'll see you back in a bit. Okay, we're back. It is finished. Let me minimize this. Always wait for everything to finish and I get that green check mark. I've got a couple things here, hardware compatibility and vSAN build recommendation. Basically, these two warnings are saying you're not using supported hardware. I'm going to ignore it. In a production environment, I would not ignore that. I'd ask why, and I would investigate, fix things. If I click on my cluster here, you'll see my 6 nodes. I can't tell by looking here that they're on different buildings, let's say, right? But host 1, 2, and 3 are, let's say, in building A. Host 3, 4, 5, and 6 are in building B, right? That's how I set it up with those fault domains. If I click on my data store, you'll see my vSAN data store is right there. Okay, so I just now created technically a vSAN data store across a campus, let's say, right? And we talked about the requirements and limitations. If I click on the cluster, if I go to configure, if I scroll down to vSAN fault domains, there's my fault domains. I got Peterborough and Toronto. Toronto's the preferred one. We talked about that. And you could change this around. I could make Peterborough the preferred one if I want to. Okay, let's create a VM. Let's right click on one of the hosts. Let's say new VM. I'm going to say next. By the way, I don't have distributed resource scheduler set up, or I could right click on the cluster to create it. So I'm just going to say right click on the host, new VM. I'll go next. I don't care the name of the VM. Actually, we'll call it VM1. Why not? Let's go back here. VM1. We'll go next. It's on host 1. That's fine. I'll pick the vSAN data store. I'm going to go with the default vSAN data store policy. Remember, the vSAN default one is failure to tolerate equals 1. Okay, I'm just going to go with the default. I'm going to click next. Whatever Windows, it's fine. I'm going to make a small 5 gig disk here. I'll go next. Finished. And I just wait. Let me just let that come up. There we go. And I'll go to here. There's VM1. Probably just takes a little while for it to refresh. There we go. So there's VM1. If I select that, let's get rid of this. If I select it, if I go to monitor, if I go to physical displacement, it's a failure to tolerate equals 1, right? So you see the home directory right here, and you see the hard drive right here. You do not see the VM kernel swap file because the VM's turned off. Let's minimize the home just to keep things clear. So my hard drive, I got a component, and a witness. So remember the components, let's say that was a 10 gig or 5 gig. So one will be 5 gig, the other will be 5 gig. We're mirroring those two. That's why it says RAID 1. Then we have our witness. Now notice over here, the witness is running on that witness appliance. Okay, that's somewhere else. And in this case, I've got one component on host 1. So that's in my Toronto site. And the other component is in host 6. That's in the Peterborough site. So I actually have my VM across the sites. So that's kind of cool. If I want a better level of protection, I could do something like this. Let's create another VM. Let's right click on, again, host 1, I don't care. Let's say new VM. We'll click next. I'll call it VM2. VM2. We'll go next. Again, I don't care where it is. Let's pick the vSAN data store again. Let's go into, actually, sorry, it's not going to show it to me here. Oh, man, no. Let's cancel this. Sorry about that, folks. Let's create a storage policy. Let's go into here. Let's create under my drop down. Let's go into policies and profiles. Let's create a new one. I'll call this stretched cluster. I'll call it stretched cluster policy. Failure to tolerate equals 1. Okay, and we'll go next. I'll make it a vSAN one. I'll go next. Now this is, I'll create a separate video on nested fault domains. I won't get into it right now, but let me show you the site disaster tolerance. Right now it's none. It's not going to withstand a site failure. If I go into site mirroring stretched cluster, because we created a stretched cluster, now I'm going to pick failure to tolerate equals 1. So I'll go next. And then I'll pick notice my compatible data store is my vSAN data store. Beautiful. I'll go next. I'll go finished. So now let's create my VM. Let's go into inventory. Let's right click. Let's go new virtual machine. Create a new VM. We'll call that VM2. Let's go next. I'll leave it on host 1. I'll pick my vSAN data store. But I'm going to go in here now and pick my stretch cluster policy. And I spelt it wrong. Failure to tolerate equals 1. And I'll go next. Whatever, I don't care about that. And we'll make it a small disk. 5. And we'll go next. And then we go finish. Give it a few seconds just to finish things up. Okay. I always like to give it a few seconds. Create VM. There we go. So let's pick VM2 now. Let's look at our physical displacement. Let's get rid of this so we get a better view. Notice here, again, failure to tolerate equals 1. Notice again, we got a component and a component. One's on host 2, one's on host 3. That's in Toronto on one site. Then we have another component, a RAID 1 component, one on host 4, one on host 5, and that's in Peterborough, the different fault domain. Then we have a witness component on the witness appliance. Then we have the witness components on host 5 and host 1 in Toronto. So basically what I've done now is since I got a 3-node cluster at each, I have a 6-node cluster, 3 hosts are in one site, 3 hosts are in the other site. So I put a component, and a witness on one site. Then I take that and mirror it over to the other site. So I got a component, and a witness over here, and I'm doing RAID 1. So much higher level of availability if there's a failure, which I talked about in the lecture. Okay? So that's basically it. Now, for a stretch cluster, pretty easy to set up. If you got questions, comments, leave it down below. I hope you enjoyed this. Give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends and stuff. My next, another video to this you're going to want to watch is my nested fault domains. And I'll leave a link for that right now so you can actually check that out. And I go through this a little bit more. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.